Okay, nervous system time. It's interesting if you want to get metaphysical with me for a moment. It's how much of our body do we really have control over? Can you decide that you're going to digest your food faster? Hmm? Or maybe do you want to spontaneously increase your metabolic rate by 25%? Well, after this can, it might probably will. The answer is no. We really have almost no control over our body because our body does that automatically for us. It's pretty cool. So, how much of our body do we have control over? And the answer is basically our brain. That's basically it. In fact, even our muscle movement is really just our neurons, our nervous system, asking our muscles to contract. That's how it works. So I'm going to show you something kind of neat here. There is um, there's an event called Body Worlds, which is basically what is just known as kind of off the cuff as cadaver art. And what they do is that people actually donate their bodies to this organization that creates artistic renditions of the um, of the specimens to show you the various body systems. Now, this one here, that I've nicknamed Neuron Man. This is a human body with everything stripped down except for the neurons. And this shows you just the amount of nervous tissue we have in our bodies. And of course, the brain contains the highest concentration of neurons. And then these neurons here are most likely motor neurons that send signals from the brain to the muscle so they can contract. But you'll notice that these neurons are wide reaching because it just doesn't affect your skeletal muscles, but also your smooth muscle too, like your digestive system, your cardiac system, lots of different systems in your body, renal system. That all stems from the brain. Here's looks like another image. This one's kind of neat. It is a cadaver holding a skin. Don't suggest that. You do that well for fun. All right. So, anyways, what is our nervous system? And our nervous system is simply, well, it's so simple. I am having trouble putting it into exact words. But the nervous system is based around cells in the body that, and this is just my kind of definition, that distribute and process information. And the basic cell is called the neuron. There's different types of neurons in the body. For example, there's special kinds of neurons in the brain. There's neurons in your eyes called photoreceptors. There's neurons in your skin called nociceptors, also known as pain receptors. There's lots of different receptors. Now, if you take anatomy, you'll learn about the different classifications of neurons. But we're just going to learn here about the basic structure of a neuron. And neurons, they actually, what's kind of neat is they actually communicate through electricity. So I'm going to draw a neuron here. Now, this is just a standard neuron. If you were to ask me which neuron it probably was closest related to, I'd say a motor neuron. And let's go ahead and let's label the parts of the neuron. Now, the living part of the neuron is called the cell body. And this part here is the cell body. Now, I say living part of the neuron because this is the part, this is the functional cell that perform tasks. And many neurons, what they'll do is that they'll make neurotransmitters. That's what they do in the cell body. Now, someone can sever a neuron, meaning that this long part here called the axon can be damaged, and the cell body will still live. It just can't transmit information to me anymore. Now, these sort of appendages here that jut from the cell body, they're called dendrites. And what they do is that they receive information. So this is general. When I say receive information, it's either going to receive information from another neuron, or it could receive information from the environment. For example, every time you see something, is that your neurons are going to be stimulated by light. That is going to be what receives the information. For example, the olfactory neurons in your nose, they receive smell from the environment. So a dendrite does not always look like this on a neuron, but something has to receive information either from another cell or the environment. Now, this long part here is called the axon, and the axon transmits electrical signals. So it transmits electrical signals. Because what has to happen is that when this neuron receives information from the dendrites, it needs to get that information to the very end of the neuron, these appendages here called terminal axons. And terminal axons, what they do is that they release neurotransmitter. Now, what is the fastest way to send information? Well, electricity is not a bad option. Now, what are neurotransmitters? They are cellular signals that are either received by other neurons or by cellular tissues. For example, your muscles contract when they receive a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. So to kind of show you, this red line shows your skeletal muscle tissue, and above each of your muscle fibers is an axon terminal that's going to form what's called a synapse between the tissue and the axon terminal. When it is stimulated, an electrical charge is going to travel to the axon terminal, and it's going to cause it to release neurotransmitter that's going to bind to some proteins on the cell called receptors and stimulate muscle contraction. Of course, this happens very fast, very fast. And if you want evidence of that, just move your hand or something, and that just shows you how fast this process happens. Now, neurons can also attach to other neurons. So if I'm going to draw another adjacent neuron, these are the dendrites. So it just depends on the type of neuron. There's many different classes of neurons. Now, one of those classifications of neurons are called sensory neurons. And what sensory neurons do is that they send information. So they detect information from the environment and send it to the brain for interpretation. In physiology, I do a lab on a sensory lab, which kind of shows you different kinds of sensory stimuli, and you get to sort of reflect on how your brain interprets it. But sensory neurons, what they do is it sends from sensory neurons, and then it's going to go to the brain. Then the brain is going to interpret it in some way. Examples of sensory neurons. Well, we have what's called mechanoreceptors, which are mainly found in your skin. Some examples of some mechanoreceptors is one is called the Meissner. I think there's two S's. Yeah, Meissner corpuscle. And these are sensory receptors in your dermis that detect touch. So every time you touch something, the information is being detected by the Meissner corpuscle and sent to your brain. We also have the Pacinian corpuscle, which detects pressure and is found at the very bottom of your dermis. And it's actually a special kind of receptor called a phasic receptor, meaning that it turns on and then it turns off, and then it turns on and then it turns off. So what this does is it detects pressure. You take your finger and press down on the desk, you're going to feel pressure. Then the pressure is going to go away. Now, why is that? Well, because this is a kind of receptor that turns off as long as the stimuli stays the same. But if you press down harder, for example, the pressure is going to return, then go away again. We also have thermoreceptors. What's actually interesting is that there's one for heat and one for cold, but these detect temperature change. One that is definitely not pleasant is called the nociceptor, and that detects pain. There's actually people who were born that have a genetic defect where they don't feel pain, and their lifespans usually are much shorter because you know that little kids already have a very easy job getting themselves injured. Just picture one that never learns from it. And you have kids who do things like, and this is going to sound graphic, but rip out their tongues for fun because why not? They don't understand that it's bad, so they can go through their entire lives without knowing what is bad. They don't know what pain is. And I know that some of you might say, "Hey, well that's pretty cool." Well, it's cool until you decide to try and shadow box with fire. I mean, it's pain is necessary for survival. Problem with pain, though, and this is what not to go on a tangent, is like most pain is just bad enough to make you unpleasant without actually making you stop an activity. Like I've been at the gym more times than I can count, and I'll be doing like some heavy weight, and like on a set, I'll feel my lower back twinge, for example, and I'll know that I have a back spasm or something. Now I should stop because I'm like, hey, you're injured. You should stop and rest up. No, I'm like, well, I'm already injured, so might as well finish the last set. And then I go home, and a couple hours later, I feel like I'm hurt. But pain definitely lets me down when I do that. All right, so these are just some examples of sensory receptors, but there's so many more. For example, the special senses, we have, for example, photoreceptors, and these detect light, which your brain interprets as vision. You also have the olfactory nerves, which detect smell. These are just a couple of them, but these all receive information from the environment, send it to the brain. Brain deals with it. Now, when I say your brain deals with it, that means that one of two things is going to happen. Is that the response is always going to trigger some kind of muscle. And this is either voluntary or it's involuntary. Let me give you an example. So right now you are watching this video and hopefully taking notes. If you're not taking notes and you're doing something else while this video is playing and this video is background noise, then you should stop that and you should get your notebook and start taking notes now. But if you are taking notes, well, you see this information and you're writing it down, and you're doing so because your sensory neurons are sending the information to your brain. Your brain is saying, hey, this is worthwhile. I want to do well on the test. And you are going to be taking notes. So you're choosing to make to have your muscles respond by taking notes. Now, sometimes it's involuntary. Like, for example, let's say that you drive by a restaurant and you smell really good food, and then your mouth starts to water. Well, what has happened is that your brain has decided that, oh, hey, I received information that there's food nearby. I'm hungry, so let me go ahead and get ready for food time. Or maybe you'll be walking down the street and you'll see a lion walking, near you, and you'll be afraid, and adrenaline will be pumping through your blood, and you'll be running fast. So sometimes what happens is voluntary, other times most of the time I should say it's involuntary. Now that leads us to our next one, which is going to be our motor neurons. And motor neurons, what these are is they are neurons that control muscle movements. And motor neurons are always part of the response. So it's always the response to sensory information, because everything you do is in response to sensory information. You go to the gym, you see dumbbells. It's time for curls for days, right? You're going for a run. You see a stoplight. Then you are going to know to press the light and wait for an appropriate time to cross. You're making dinner. You decide that a nice baked potato would go well with some nice A1 sauce, and that's only if you're fancy like Professor Thomas here. But everything we do, every action we take is in response to sensory information. And it is responsible for muscle contraction. But remember, muscles are not just skeletal muscles. They're also cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. In fact, in your digestive system, there's something called the enteric nervous system. And the enteric nervous system is more or less your digestive system's own nervous system, so to speak. It's actually called the second brain by some people. All right, now there's actually two parts of the nervous system. So if we're going to do a nervous system flow chart, so this is the nervous system. There's two aspects of the nervous system. One is called the central nervous system. And the central nervous system, as you'll learn if you take anatomy, it's basically separated from the rest of the nervous system called the peripheral nervous system. So it really is its own distinct section. So peripheral. That's not how you spell peripheral. See, my sensory neurons are coming through. Peripheral nervous system. I caught that typo so fast. I'll just do NS for nervous system. Now, the central nervous system is comprised of the brain, which is the main processing center of the body, as well as the spinal cord. The brain and spinal cord. And as I said, the brain and spinal cord are actually their own separate systems, and they're behind something called the blood-brain barrier. Now, the brain and spinal cord are so integral for survival that there's a special barrier that prevents most things from the blood from getting into the area where the brain and spinal cord are located. It's very selective at what can go through. That's because these are the most important parts of the functioning of the organism. It's unfortunate, though, because anytime a neuron is damaged in the central nervous system, it is not repaired. And it's not because it can't, it's just that the immune functions in the central nervous system are just overactive. What they do is that if there's damage, it just basically prevents the neuron from regenerating. Instead, it just kind of shuts everything down and cleans up the damage as fast as possible. It does so it can, clean everything up really fast. But there's nothing about the neurons that prevents it from repairing itself. It's all in the actions of the regulatory functions in the central nervous system. And I know there's some exciting research going on there that is trying to work around that to stimulate the neurons in the central nervous system to be able to regenerate. The peripheral nervous system actually has two segments to it. And the first one is called the somatic system. And the somatic system is the conscious control of muscles. It is the conscious control of muscles. And the other aspect is called the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic. And the autonomic basically means automated. So the somatic nervous system, which is the movement of your muscles, that is conscious control. That is your voluntary control. The autonomic is not. This is the unconscious control of your body's vital systems. And it's further subdivided into two separate classifications. One is called the sympathetic nervous system, also known as the fight or flight, and the other is called the parasympathetic nervous system, which is called rest and digest, which I mean, it works, but it is a little bit too simplistic for my sake, or my taste. Basically, the goal of the sympathetic nervous system, the goal is to prepare you to defend yourself against an attack, or to subdue some prey. Now, the idea behind it is that your body only has so much blood. Now, blood carries nutrients. It carries things that make cells work. So the idea behind the sympathetic nervous system is it's going to take blood away from the non-essential systems. For example, the the skin gets reduced blood flow, which is why when someone has sympathetic innervation, they turn blanched. They appear lighter. They appear lighter in complexion. Um, Also, the blood is taken away from their non-essential um, um, uh, systems, such as the digestive system, um, uh, the uh, the renal system. So blood is diverted from things that are not necessary for immediate survival, and instead that blood is shunted to the skeletal muscles and the heart. So what's going to happen is that it wants your heart to beat harder and faster, and it wants more blood to go to your skeletal muscles so they have plenty of energy to battle. Um, that's also why people with extreme sympathetic innervation can do things like lift up a car if to save some children trapped underneath. It's a very powerful system. Also, it's going to open up the bronchioles, which are the tubes that deliver oxygen to the alveoli, which allows you to get more oxygen into your blood. And you're probably saying, well, wait a second, why are the bronchioles just open all the time? Well, the downside is that if you open up your airways too much, it's going to allow more things from the environment to get in there. So it isn't optimal all the time. And of course, this is triggered by the hormone epinephrine, which is why if someone is having an asthma attack, the bronchioles are closing in response to some kind of environmental contaminant. But the epinephrine signal is so powerful that it overrides that signal for the bronchioles to close up. It's actually so powerful that it overrides it and tells them, hey, don't close, open. So that's why people with asthma, they either have an inhaler with what's called a beta 2 agonist, or they have the EpiPen in emergency situations. So that's the idea. You're going to temporarily take blood from the non-essential systems and deliver it to the essential systems, which are the ones needed for survival. Plus, it kind of helps too if you don't have as much blood in your skin. Um, the idea behind sympathetic innervation is that you're expected to get injured, and if you are, and there's not as much blood in your skin, then you won't lose as much blood. So it actually does have a survival advantage. Anytime you get scared, angry, or you begin to exercise, um, you're activating your sympathetic system. It's designed only to be activated in bursts, but in our sort of stressful lives, especially these past 2 years, is the sympathetic system is activated more than it should be. And keep in mind, it is not like an all or nothing thing. The sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, they act on what's called antagonistic control, meaning that maybe at times the sympathetic will be more activated, the parasympathetic less activated. Maybe it will be the opposite, more parasympathetic, less sympathetic. Maybe it'll be the way opposite, like if you're really scared. So it's like a dial that's constantly, going like this. Now the parasympathetic is the opposite. Now your body must do constantly all these different kinds of maintenance activities in order to survive. Digesting food, filtering toxins, making hormones, so on and so forth. So what happens is that blood is shunted from the muscles, the skeletal muscles, and instead redistributed to the other non-essential systems. Sorry. They are essential, but not for survival. But it is shunted to more of the regulatory systems. That's why when you're super relaxed, you're at home, just hanging out, you get hungry, you start to snack, and that's because your parasympathetic system is dominant, and you're doing things like digesting food, restoring nutrients, filtering waste. But you also, if you lay around too much, you'll start to feel more tired, and that's because um, blood is not really going to your skeletal muscles because it's focusing on maintaining your body. So the parasympathetic system is prioritizes your body's maintenance and regulation. But as I said, it is on what's called a antagonistic control, meaning they both can't be activated the same. One is going to be more dominant than the other. So we're going to close with a basic sensory arc. And this is how your brain interprets and delivers information. Now, sensory neurons are what we call the afferent pathway. So what these do is that they get information from the environment and they deliver it to either the brain, which we call the integrating center, because it is going to um, going to interpret the information. So it's either going to the brain, or in the case of what's called a reflex, it can go to the spinal cord. Yes, reflexes go to the spinal cord. And it can also act as an integrating center. The idea of a reflex is it's either an innate or learned immediate response intended to ensure your survival. So if you feel like a fly has gotten into your eye, how you close your eye really fast, or if you touch a hot stove and your hand recoils right away, um, that is a reflex. And the reason why it goes to your spinal cord and not your brain is because it's something that you don't need to think about. You just need to stop what you are doing that's causing the problem, or just react so fast that thinking is not the priority. It's reacting. Now, the end response is going to be what's going to go down what's called the efferent pathway, which is the motor neurons. And we call this the efferent. Think of E for exit. And this is how your body is going to respond. Okay, so that is our chapter on the nervous system. If you do like this stuff, well, in physiology and anatomy, we cover this ad nauseum. So something to consider if you're finding this stuff fun. All right, well, until we meet again, over and out.